Um, I'm Gareth Morgan from Dangos, and with us today we have Steffan Evans from the Bevan Foundation, who's going to tell us about the recent report they produced on the feasibility of a Welsh benefit system. Do you want to kick off with a brief intro to yourself and Bevan, please, Steffan?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just get my screen up whilst I'm doing that as well. Bore da pawb, I'm Steffan Evans. I lead the Bevan Foundation's policy work on poverty in Wales. And for those of you unfamiliar with us, we're a think tank. Wales is the most influential think tank that works on long-term solutions to poverty and inequality in Wales. So it's great to be able to talk to you this morning about this work we've been doing on Welsh benefits. So without further ado, I'll crack on maybe with the presentation. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. What I might do so that you don't have to listen to me drone on kind of for all the session is after I've given a bit of an overview of what we mean by Welsh benefits and kind of why we think there's a case for establishing such a system. Might take a break at that point to address any questions you've got from the first part of the session. So feel free to send them in, and then I'll move on to a little bit more detail in terms of what we would like to see kind of done and kind of the practicalities and in particular the report policy and practice did for us. So without further ado, I'll dive into the report itself. And to kind of kick us off, really, I thought it might be useful for many of you to give a bit of an overview in terms of, I guess, what are we talking about when we're using the term Welsh benefits? Because as I'm sure most of you will know, benefits per se have not been devolved to Wales. Universal credit hasn't, legacy benefits haven't. So when we're talking about Welsh benefits, what do we actually mean? And by that, we mean the various grants, allowances, and in-kind support that Welsh Government provides or local authorities administer in Wales, where eligibility is restricted to people on low income. So there's some sort of means test for people to be able to get support that is linked in some way to either being on a low income or being in receipt of universal credit or a legacy benefit that provides families with cash or in-kind support. So in 2018-19, we estimated that the Welsh Government was spending about 400 million on these sorts of schemes. So, quite a chunky amount of money. That was actually more than was being spent on the time on job seekers allowance and the work element of universal credit combined. So these are chunky programs that the Welsh Government fund. We know that the amount of money they spend has probably increased significantly again since then, given what we've seen in reaction to COVID and the cost of living crisis. The fact that so many new schemes have been created makes it difficult to, I guess, give an actual number, but it gives us a sense, I guess, of the significance. And to give you an example of what we mean when we're talking about Welsh benefits, we're talking about things like the council tax reduction scheme, free school meals, specifically in secondary schools, obviously where there's still the means test, or where that will still continue to be the case. After next year, discretionary assistance fund, EMA, DHPs as well. So obviously DHPs, there is a UK government component there. There is significant leeway for both local authorities and Welsh government to top up that payment and provide more money to people. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about Welsh benefits. And they do really matter to people. They top up the support that people receive through the UK social security system, and they're worth up to £4,000 per year per household. Now, it's probably quite unlikely that a household would get all of them, but it gives you a sense, I guess, of the scope and the breadth that these schemes operate across. And it puts money in the pockets of families that are struggling and can, both either directly lift people out of poverty or can provide, that support to lift people out of destitution to be able to have enough to at least cover the essentials. And we think there is significant scope to improve the support that's offered through these schemes. So that's what we're talking about, and that's why we're looking at it. So to delve into kind of some of those issues a bit further about why we think there's a need for access here, work here on Welsh benefits. And I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about 4 significant limitations we can see with the current system. So the first of these relates to how support is accessed. There's issues around the eligibility criteria. There's issues around the value of the support that's offered. And there are also questions about whether there's gaps, in the support that's provided. So to go maybe into eligibility criteria first, the eligibility criteria of these schemes are not joined up to each other. There are differences between them. The eligibility criteria is often arbitrary, meaning that some people on low incomes miss out on support. So the obvious example to this would be preschool meals in secondary schools, where if your income is more than £7,400 per year through universal credit, you do not qualify for free school meals in secondary schools. So, a really low benchmark there, below the poverty thresholds for people. And we've also seen income caps frozen for some of these schemes as well. So where there's a fixed cash income criteria, a lot of these have not been uprated to be in line with inflation. So we know there's issues around the eligibility criteria. We also know that there's issues around access. Because these schemes are viewed separately from each other, because they're managed by different agencies, households have to submit multiple application forms to get the support they're entitled to. So it's not unfeasible for a household with a child in preschool and a child in primary school to have about 4 or 5 forms that they may have to fill in to get all the rights-based Welsh benefits they're entitled to. And there could be, depending on their circumstances, another 2 or 3 discretionary schemes that they could qualify for as well, meaning that you could well end up having to fill in 6 or 7 different forms to get all the support that you're entitled to. We also know that there are different approaches to administering the system, kind of between local authorities, depending on where you live. And we know that millions go unclaimed each year from these Welsh benefits, that the take-up rates for these is nowhere near what they should be, given the level of need in Welsh communities. We also think longer term that there's issues around the value of the support as well. So the cash value of a number of these support schemes has been unchanged for a period. The example we always used to use here was the EMA, which had not been uprated since 2004-05. But we're pleased, following some campaigning from ourselves and others, that EMA is now being uprated for the next school year to £40. So that, it's not catching back up to where it would be had it increased in line with inflation, but that's a not insignificant increase there. So, it does show that we can get change through our work in this area to make things better. And of course, there's concerns as well about whether the support on offer is sufficient in it, in itself. Is it giving people enough to cover the essentials to make sure that they have, a good quality of life? And then finally, there's also questions around gaps in provision. I'm sure each of you will know things that people are struggling with that you might not be able to support them with. We've seen through COVID and the cost of living crisis, the Welsh Government introduced a range of new schemes to support people in low-income households. So the fuel support scheme, winter fuel support scheme would be the obvious one here, I guess, that we've seen a lot of attention over the past 12 to 18 months. That's now obviously come to an end. But the fact that that scheme was created, I guess, identifies the fact that maybe there was a gap in provision there, or raises the question, were there other ways that we could get money out to people using existing schemes, to reduce kind of the challenges of creating new schemes, new payments, new systems? So that's what we see as the challenge with the current system. And we think that creating a new Welsh benefit system could provide the opportunity to overhaul and to bring these together into a coherent Welsh benefit system. And we think that there could be kind of some key features that underpin this. So, looking at things, looking to make sure that there's a focus on households on low income. We think one way you could look to do this is looking at maybe universal credit as some sort of criterion, that establishes a baseline perhaps, but there's other areas you could look at. The focus on cash or in-kind support, as we've already mentioned. Then the one I'm going to focus on today in particular is around the single access point, making sure that people don't have to fill in several different forms, making sure that people can access the schemes using the channels that best work for them. Where possible, having a system that's based on eligibility, not kind of rights-based eligibility, not discretion. And that's why I'm going to talk mainly about the rights-based schemes when I delve into a bit more detail shortly. So I'm not going to talk much about DAF or DHPs today, given the discretionary nature of them. And we also think about there's a fundamental need to make sure that everyone's treated with dignity and respect in that process. So we think that a Welsh benefit system could make it easier for people to apply for all the Welsh benefits they're entitled to, make it easier for public bodies to administer Welsh benefits, boost take-up. Some of the calculations we've had from Policy and Practice from their work suggest that creating a Welsh benefit system where we pull all of these together into one coherent system could boost take-up by 73 to 75 million pounds annually. So, not insignificant amount of money there, but we could be getting into families' pockets. And we also think it provides an opportunity for a more holistic discussion about the support that is made available for people on low incomes. So that gives a bit of a flavour, I guess, in terms of what we see the challenges of a current system, and maybe some idea about where we think the direction of travel should be. Did anyone have any questions about that specifically before I move on, maybe to look at the policy and practice work and what was that and kind of, I guess, where we think the next stages should be?
There's nothing coming in yet under the Q&A bit, but if people want to post questions there, then please do that and we can pick them up. I've got one question around the eligibility issue. And it's really, I suppose, the attractive, though, the idea of bringing together the different kind of often disparate methods of looking at eligibility. Is it actually feasible, given that some of these benefits, I suppose, are there for different types of needs? Some things are there to reflect a weekly need that might people's circumstances might change the week after next, and therefore they would no longer require that support. Some things are very much one-off kind of crisis events, and other things really are very much longer kind of average needs over a year. Is it feasible to try and bring things together in that sense?
So I think that's why I think we've drawn a distinction here. We're working with policy and practice between the rights-based schemes and the discretionary ones. I think you're right. With something like the DAF, where that's responding to a particular crisis point, that is you're going to need a bit of discretion probably in the system there, and you're also you need that flexibility in the system, don't you, to take into account that that's the purpose of it, is a crisis support. So there is space absolutely for some schemes probably that sit outside the common kind of eligibility threshold. I think there are also probably kind of reflecting those different needs. So kind of schools essential grant, what used to be PDG access, you're going to need to know that's designed to support people with the cost of school. Therefore, having a child of school age is obviously going to need to be an eligibility criteria for that, in a way that it's not going to be for the counter tax reduction scheme. So I might touch on actually some ways that we think there's workarounds to some of that. But if you can get as much consistency as possible between the schemes, then I think that in itself it is a positive thing to be aiming for. But allowing, as we discussed, those extra schemes to pick up kind of, I guess, where there are going to be cracks potentially in that system.
Okay. Carl from Wrexham has also posted a question saying there the Welsh Government contributed to fuel vouchers and food bank vouchers, which again requires separate applications, and I'd add often discretionary ones there again. So he thinks that a one-stop shop would be really, really useful as an access point.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's I think what we think kind of response to the cost of living crisis has highlighted is, how we've created all these new kind of emergency schemes probably highlights the weaknesses within the system itself. If you have a more coherent system that gives people the support they need anyway, it would have been much easier to maybe come in and kind of topped up maybe an existing scheme to get the money out to people, rather than the challenges a lot of you are going to be facing with learning about a brand new scheme that the Welsh Government is now running to support people. And who's to say how it's going to go for this winter? Some of the schemes that have been discontinued, it's not unfeasible that some of those would come back, and it's not unfeasible that there may be some new ones created over the next few months if we see pressure points, on mortgages, for example. That's just one example there, but you could easily imagine something coming to pass in that space if those pressures become more acute.
Okay, Jordan's raised a hand there as well, so I'm not sure that I can unmute you, Jordan, or whether you want to type something in the Q&A. Let me see if I can do that. Help if I could see the question. Help if I could see the control screen. Oh, okay. And Jordan said it was an error. Sorry. Right. Back to you, Steffan.
Lovely. Okay, great. So back as, I guess, a bit of a background, some of the context. I'll just move on now to maybe look at the feasibility and focusing in particularly on the policy and practice work for us. So just to give you maybe a quick overview, maybe of where the state of play is right now. We've been banging the drum, I guess, for an idea of Welsh benefits for quite some time now. It's kind of 2019, 2020 is when we first started putting stuff out in the public arena on this. It was around that time that the then Assembly Local Government and Housing Committee, I think was the name. They keep changing the names of the committees, don't they? But I think that was a committee at the time, also put in the public arena for the first time the recommendation that the Welsh Government should create something on this. And what we've seen in the interim is that there are now local authorities already taking some action on this. Some authorities were doing this anyway. Others, I think, have been more proactive in trying to develop approaches to unify the system as much as they can within kind of the things that they have control over. So there's definitely some progress happening there. We have now also got to a point where there is cross-party support in the Senedd to the idea. So there have been votes in the Senedd where we've had people from all the major political parties support it, with very little objection from them, to the principle and to the idea. So against that concept, I should also say we've had a number of Senedd committee reports as well since, becoming more and more forceful in calling for the creation of such a system. And in part, perhaps as a response to this pressure, the Welsh Government has been doing some work in establishing what they're calling a Welsh Benefit Charter. And from what we can see, I think it's quite difficult to gauge exactly what stage this is at because it's gone a bit quiet recently. But I think kind of they're going to be consulting with partners over the next few months, I think, is my understanding of where this is at. And what the charter does is, I guess, set out some principles that would be underlying a Welsh benefit system. And, we think that's really positive. It's good. These principles should be there. It could have, and there's stuff we absolutely agree with. But we also want to try and move the conversation beyond that. This isn't just about creating a charter or a best practice. No, we think for real change, you need that commitment to kind of further practice change, to further, legislation, regulation changes, etc. So that's where the focus is. And that's why we've been keen to move the conversation on to actually implementing this, given now that everyone agrees in principle that this is a good idea. And to do that, we've worked with a coalition of 9 other organisations to commission external experts, policy and practice to explore the feasibility of establishing a Welsh benefit system from a data perspective. The reason we did that was that when we've been having conversations around this, concerns around this have primarily focused on, do we have the data to do it? Or if we do have the data, can we share the data? And there's also been some software and IT concerns flagged up. So we wanted to have some real experts in. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with policy and practice. They're experts in this field in terms of boosting income maximization to better design of social security systems. And there's been as you can see, there's a real broad range of organisations who've got involved in this work as well, ranging from the WLGA, so the Welsh Local Government Association, trade unions, charities as well that provide support to people, which really does illustrate, I guess, the breadth of interest in this work. So we've asked them to go away and have a look at, is it possible from a data perspective? And if so, what would need to happen to make it happen, to deliver it, with a particular focus on the rights-based benefits, because as I already touched on, some of those discretionary schemes such as DAF, you are not going to be able to bring them into the system in the same way, given the element of discretion here, so you're not going to be able to say, if you get DAF, you ought to get all the other stuff in the same way that you might be able to do with preschool meals and the school's essential grant. And they did find that there are some challenges to be overcome. And in particular, there were 2 challenges, I think, that really came out of their work. The first is that data are currently held in disaggregated benefit-specific databases. So that's obviously a challenge. So EMA, for example, Education Maintenance Allowance, you apply for that through Student Finance Wales, whereas you apply for free school meals through your local authority. So obviously they're holding the data by different bodies. So that is one challenge. And then the second is that existing data sets don't necessarily map on that easily to each other, nor do they map on to some of the data shared by the Universal Credit data share. So, kind of the data you need, and kind of touching, I guess, on what you mentioned previously, Gareth, about kind of, accessing free school meals is not the same as the data you need to process EMA, so they're not collecting the same data necessarily. So there are challenges around that. But they've also identified that there are real features of the Welsh system that we currently have that actually provide a real opportunity to address some of these challenges. The first of these is that the regulations governing most of these Welsh benefits are set by the Welsh Government. Therefore, it is within their gift to make the regulatory changes needed to facilitate this. So it's not as if we need to go, well, they're sat with different people, we need them to come into a room together and try and make this, kind of everyone get along. There are powers there to enable us to do that that the Welsh Government could act on. They've also kind of argued that the rollout of universal credit provides an opportunity to use verified data on households in receipt of universal credit to support a common approach to Welsh rights-based benefits. So we know that kind of that data is being held. Could that be used to verify applications to minimize what people have to put in themselves? That we're using that data that's held elsewhere. We know there's conversations also going on between the Scottish Government and the DWP at the moment for that purpose. So there's a transfer for the Welsh Government maybe to piggyback off the back of those conversations as well. There's also lots of really good practice already in place in Wales. We know that a lot of local authorities, for example, are doing really good things on council tax reduction scheme using UC data to simplify that process. So there's lots of good practice there to build on. So it's not as if we're starting from scratch here. There is some good stuff going on. And we know that actually organisations that administer Welsh Benefit already hold a great deal of data about the people making these applications as well. So there is an opportunity. It's not as if the data isn't held, it's just not being held in an aggregated way. So actually there are possibilities here to kind of build on that and again, bringing the data together to kind of make a more coherent system. So based on that, they've identified a series of short-term and longer-term reforms that they think, we need to make to get this system to where we want it. So first is they argue that we need to introduce an uniform approach to the identification of eligibility and targeting of support. For example, the use of the universal credit data share, for council tax reduction scheme, and possibly the creation of a Welsh benefits calculator as well. These are things that could be done. Kind of the sharing that best practice to have a uniform approach could be done fairly swiftly. The creation of a Welsh benefits calculator would allow claimants, to a bit like you could use Turn to Us. That sort of process could be created at a Welsh level so that people have a better idea, I guess, of what they're eligible to receive. So that could be done fairly swiftly. Sorry. There's also an opportunity to introduce greater uniformity in the application forms for Welsh Benefits. So making all the forms look the same, that wouldn't take a lot of effort, but would make people be aware that the support they're applying for is part of a broader system. And we know there's actually some work ongoing in Welsh Government at the moment on this particular bit, looking at one or two of the benefits. So that's something there's already some work going on around. And then introducing a uniform approach to the automisation of CTRS. We know this has been done in some parts of Wales, but it's not been done everywhere. So how can we get that to be the case? That could be done quite swiftly as well. Other short-term reforms that they identify include kind of introducing a common approach to risk in the verification of evidence. So we know that one of the greatest challenges at the moment in getting maybe local authorities or other public bodies to take new approaches to administering benefit is risk averseness, not wanting to be audited and to have been found to do something the wrong way. So there's a suppose here, could the Welsh Government issue guidance to provide to reassure people, no, you're allowed to do this. So the example that always comes to my mind here is the then Pupil Development Grant Access, so the school uniform grant. We did some work on this in 2019, 2020, and we found that there was one local authority in Wales that required every single parent who applied for support through the scheme to apply for support after they bought clothing and to send in a receipt for every single item of clothing they bought through the scheme. No other local authority in Wales was doing that. And when we dug in a bit deeper, it was about, well, our audit team is quite officious. The guidance we've got from Welsh Government is not very clear. So addressing that could enable that best practice to be shared more widely, getting that stuff, these are really simple short-term stuff that we've done in the direction of travel we want to see, but would make a difference in the here and now. And then finally, on the short-term stuff, undertake a review of the current data capture requirements and aim to minimize the duplication and input of unnecessary data. So actually getting to grips with what are we trying to capture? Do we really need it? And kind of an example that was given to us by the policy practice team was, most of these schemes ask people how much does someone earn. We don't then believe them in terms of how much they earn. We go and check that against the system to see whether that's true or not. So given that we're going to be doing that anyway, why don't we just cut out that question and just do that off the back end? There's examples of stuff like that could be done that would reduce the amount of questions that people would need to be asked. So if we're going to be verifying data, do we actually need to be asking for it? Let's ask for data that is fundamentally essential for the process, not some stuff that actually we can access in other ways anyway. So those are some of the shorter term support changes that we think could make a real difference. Policy practice then identified a number of medium to long term changes. So these, acknowledging that there are difficulties in getting these things done, but they are possible and they are doable. So the first of these would be to amend the regulations governing Welsh Benefits to ensure more uniformity between Welsh Benefits and universal credit. So, so to make sure that the systems are better aligned and better interact. They also kind of identify that one way that you'd be able to massively reduce this process, the different forms, whilst allowing the different data necessary to be captured, would be to create a single portal for data verification. So to mean local authorities, etc., wouldn't need to access loads of different portals to make sure that the data collected is accurate. But also from the person perspective, this could be the long-term aim here, is to have a single kind of digital site where it automatically populates all the other information it needs. So, you don't have to fill in your name and address 6 times. It takes your name and address, automatically populates the others, and then you're only being asked to fill in the extra bits you require to meet the criteria for a particular scheme. Other changes that they suggest, introducing a common automated approach to free school meals. So we know that some local authorities, for example, are doing stuff like at the point where children register for schools, there's a question on that form, would you like your child to check if your child's eligible for free school meals? Could we have that as a common approach? So that we're not having then parents having to submit application forms every year. That's baked into the system. So obviously this would be a secondary school issue, given the universal rollout in primary schools, but you can see the potential there for that sort of approach. Greater visibility over low-income citizens in Wales as well. There's a greater data sharing from DWP, so that's a theme, I guess, that comes throughout, building those relationships. And also, include a Welsh Benefits indicator within UK-wide benefit applications. So have an option in there. Would you like us also to share your data with the Welsh Government or with Welsh local authorities to check whether you're eligible for any further support? Getting those sorts of questions built in. There are conversations ongoing between Scotland and the UK government, so could we be having those conversations with Wales as well? So it gives you a sense, really, I guess, of the sort of changes what you think need to happen to make this possible. But I hope it illustrates that we think things can be done. In terms of what next, what we want to see from Welsh Government is to just get on and implement the short-term reforms. They've been identified because there's things that could be done there tomorrow that would make life easier for people and wouldn't involve complicated changes to the system. Acknowledging some of the complexities around some of the larger medium to longer term changes, we think there's a scope for the Welsh Government to set up a working group to kind of get that process ongoing. Because what we don't want is to end up in a position, say, that we all agree this is a good thing, everyone wants to work towards it, but someone has got an IT contract finishing the end of the next financial year, and they end up entering into a 10-year agreement with someone, which means that the whole thing can't happen for 10 years. So getting a working group together, to kind of get these things in common so that we work towards common timescales, etc., we think would be really positive, but allow us to have the time, to make the changes necessary. As we said, we think the aim needs to be the single application portal. And what we're going to be doing over the summer is capturing people's lived experience of trying to access the system again. We're hoping to have something out in the autumn to, again, illustrate why this matters. The policy and practice report is really quite technical. So we want to make the human kind of story again to remind people why this matters. And then finally, in terms of, I guess, where we think things are going, the reaction to the report has been really, really positive. We will, in the next fortnight, we were originally meant to have a meeting earlier this month with the Minister for Social Justice, but that was postponed because we wanted to bring in the Minister for Finance, Local Government, and Sian Gwenllian, acting as Plaid Cymru's designated member, into the meeting. And from conversations we've had elsewhere, we think that's quite a positive sign that this is something that Welsh Government are actually quite serious about taking forward. There are going to be moves in this space, whether that's everything we want to see or kind of a process towards that. But the fact that we've got two ministers and one kind of hybrid minister, if you like, with the Plaid Cymru role, shows that this is something that is being taken quite seriously in Welsh Government. So we think this is something where there's a need to watch this space over the next few months, regardless. And we're also aware that there has been some positive reaction to the work among local authorities. And we know that there are some local authorities already actively looking at their own practices off the back of this to see actually some of those short-term changes, we've talked about, can they just crack on and do those anyway, instead of waiting for the Welsh Government to lead that process. So we think the reaction has been really positive and suggests that there is buy-in for this work at multiple levels. If you want to find out more, the report's available in full. I'm more than happy to share the slides with Gareth after, so there'll be a link there for you to access the report and to read a bit more yourself. It's quite a hefty report, it's 70-odd pages, but I think that's needed. It goes into detail, far more greater detail than I can today with you, on that. So if you're keen to explore that in a bit more detail, I'm sure that would be useful. But yeah, I'll stop sharing there and hand back to Gareth.
Great, thanks, Steffan. There's some really interesting stuff there. And as a kind of a long-term benefits techie, I've got some really kind of interesting thoughts that I need to ponder about on that. We've got a couple of questions that came in. Yvonne from Swansea Council said, how would a one-stop shop work to get emergency help to people who are not covered under the scheme? So that's people maybe who are liable for council tax, no kids, but on a low income.
Yeah, so I think that's a fundamental question of the eligibility criteria, I guess, isn't it? So that problem is there in the existing system. I guess bringing existing system together to make kind of a more coherent one risks having those challenges continue. I think in the longer term, we'd like to see the eligibility criteria reformed to capture more people. So I think those risks are going to continue to be there. There are flexibilities in something like DAF, for example, where you don't need to be on any of the qualifying benefits to get the EAP necessarily. So I guess pointing people in that direction is going to continue to be really important. So I imagine what we see is that there's the single access point to people who can qualify for stuff. For people who can't, hopefully there's less work and support in the people who qualify for all the schemes, because it's going to be an easier system, which should hopefully free up time to enable you to, I guess, support people in the more complicated cases who fall outside the scope of the schemes, but you might be able to point them to other forms of support that they're able to access, be that DAP, or maybe kind of some of the charitable stuff, some of the fuel bank stuff, or all of those sorts of schemes.
Yeah, I think the big advantage of having a kind of common data set and a one-stop shop is that people who qualify for help but don't perhaps know that a particular scheme exists could be told that they qualify for that scheme because they provided data for some other kind of request for help.
Yeah, absolutely.
You talked a bit about the idea of minimizing the data you've got to provide at the beginning, so that you can get things like earnings information later on. Isn't there a problem there that puts a huge admin load on people because you have to make a formal application effectively then before you start looking at whether people qualify or not? Whereas
So what?
if you ask them what their earnings are, first of all, they can see that, well, I'm on £300,000 a year, so actually I'm not going to qualify.
So I guess there's an element of that. I think what it builds on is that work is being undertaken anyway. So the validating data, that data verification is happening anyway. So so why would we need people to fill it in if that's going to be double checked after? I accept your point, but that you may end up seeing more people apply in, they maybe put a speculative form in. So maybe that is something to have consideration about, really, in terms of this, next stage of developing the work is striking the right balance on that. So minimizing the amount of stuff people have to fill in to make life as easy as possible, but at the same time, appreciating that you're going to need a few questions in there as well. It's not about get rid of all the questions. It's about to have as few questions as possible, basically.
Yeah, it's getting the balance right. It would be lovely if we
Absolutely.
automatically pushed benefits to everybody who's entitled to them without them telling us, but we can't do that. We've got an anonymous point here being made. It says, wouldn't a separate calculator cause more confusion? You were talking about a Welsh benefits calculator. Entitled to, etc., already recommend grants and discounts. Wouldn't people just use the Welsh calculator and miss out on main benefits?
I think that's a fair concern. So again, it's around the language you'd use on that, isn't it? So I think at the moment, I think where that comes from is if you land on the Welsh government page for free school meals at the moment, it doesn't automatically prompt you to look at council tax reduction scheme or anything like that. So having that built into that page, but then making it really clear in big writing, also don't forget you are entitled to it, kind of, I think something like that. I think that's what we're envisioning here. So something that it's on the Welsh Government website to pull this stuff together, so that people are aware that these things are linked. But then at the same time, absolutely making it clear to people that, you still need to go for your UK ones because they're still really important.
Or ideally, maybe trying to get them all in one place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We've still got plenty of time for people to put more questions in. One thing that I did wonder about is we're talking about a Welsh benefit system, but are there any specifically kind of Welsh needs that would differ from the rest of the UK?
So I guess so. Well, firstly, these schemes exist separately in Wales already. I guess most. So on the discretionary fund DHPs, there's a question to be had there about how you'd classify that. Healthy Start vouchers is the other one, I guess, where you'd have a question about how exactly you'd classify that. But the others, they already exist. And some of these exist only in Wales. So EMA does not exist in England, but it does exist in Wales. So I guess these grow out of the fact that there are different politics with different priorities, and that's why we've been very focused on this work about the schemes that already exist. I think people first thought when we were talking about this, thought we were talking about the devolution of further benefits. And our view on this is that the purpose of this work is to make the system we already got work better. Now, if you then wanted to have a conversation about could you devolve other powers to join with it, that is a question you could have. But I think that's where your question about any specific Welsh needs would really come to the fore at that point, Ben, about, do we need to devolve the power over X, Y, or Z because there's a particular need in Wales that isn't reflected out through the UK system. But yeah, the focus has been very much on the schemes that already exist, making those ones work better.
Yeah, I won't ask the follow-up about are there any unmet Welsh needs because you only got a short while left and you'd need a few hours on that one. Carl said that from Wrexham said that there's scope for DWP to automatically apply these benefits, albeit they're devolved. They should be aware, he says, of the finances of a family or individual, and then we wouldn't have millions going unclaimed.
Yeah, I think absolutely, and that's where kind of like the suggestion may be around the question in the you could have if we could get to the point, I know from policy conversations, policy in practice, but this is an active conversation with the Scottish government at the moment about, because obviously they've got greater powers in this regard, is to add a box. Do you want to be made aware of Scottish choices? If we could get that in, that bakes that into the system then and would make it much, much, much easier. And I think there is a problem. There was some press reports, weren't there, last year, the year before, about how the DWP were pushing people to claim DAF over their own hardship funds. So there's those challenges as well, I guess. But that would be the politics of trying to work this out. But yeah, I absolutely agree. Making it as seamless as possible for people to be moved from one system to the other, I think definitely is the aim.
Yeah, I mean that is an interesting point about DWP pushing people on to deaf first, because I've seen some local authorities. I can't think of any Welsh examples where before people can get access to things like household support fund, authorities are asking them to demonstrate that they have tried other sources of help first, and you can understand the financial pressures that lie behind that. So, is there a kind of a cultural change that needs to happen within local authorities as well?
Oh, I think absolutely. I talked. I think I mentioned about the 73 to 75 million pounds of policy practice. Could have calculated that a better system could deliver to getting the money out the door. The bulk of that is through council tax reduction scheme. And inevitably, one of the questions is going to be who's going to fund that. Now, our point would be, well, that money should already be allocated within the system. This isn't creating new people eligible for support. This is making sure that the people who already are eligible get the support they need. But there are these perverse incentives within the system for people not necessarily to provide. Now, I don't think that's happening across the boards, and I don't think people are consciously doing it. But I think having that culture shift is really important. I think the risk aversion point, I think, is probably the most important on the culture. I think, because it's understandable that if you're working in a team where you've got an audit department that is really worried about this stuff, then you are likely to put more hurdles in people's way to get the support they need, versus a local authority that might take a little bit more of a creative approach. So that's where kind of the cultural change there. And I think the Welsh Government has got a really important role to play there through guidance, that sort of stuff, to make it really clear to people, do not worry about this as long as you do this. So the uniform example I gave earlier, kind of just a guidance note going on and saying, you do not need to have receipts on every applicant that's gone in. Something like that could have eased that problem in the first place, rather than kind of, people like us having to kind of pick up on this and kind of change the culture that way.
So does that means it's more of a kind of political leadership issue than an administrative one?
I think it depends as well. Kind of, I think there's cultures within administrative teams as well, isn't there? So it depends on that as well. Depends the level of engagement, I guess, with political leadership. This is the admin side of stuff as well. There's different dynamics in each local authority in Wales, and you wouldn't want the one size fits all approach anyway. They reflect the local needs of the local communities in terms of that sense. But I think kind of making it clear to people that if the practices that we know are prohibitive for people, making it clear you don't need to do those, because we are not going to punish you. We are not going to come after you. Wales Audit is not going to come after you. Should hopefully give people the breathing space to be able to be more creative and follow the best practice.
Have you seen any differences across Welsh authorities, perhaps because of their political makeup, in the broad approach they take towards supporting people?
I don't know. We've definitely seen differences between Welsh local authorities. I can't say I would have noticed where there was political or internal kind of cultures, really. Composition of teams matters a lot for this as well, I think. So, some local authorities have free school meals set within the education department. Others have it sit within Revs and Bens. So that's obviously going to have an impact in terms of the way you view free school meals and that process. So I think it's that more than the political composition, I think, that seems to be having an impact. But there are certainly differences between authorities.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I have to remember, I often do, many years ago now, when Cardiff City put on their housing benefit inquiry counter people from the welfare rights team, and it had a huge impact on benefits take up and so forth, because you put the expertise at the front facing the people. But that was very much, I think, a political decision that was reversed the change of administration a little bit later on. But there are things that you can do by tweaking as you say, the structure and the placement of systems.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I think some of the short-term recommendations as well. A lot of them are they're really low-level stuff. They're not big, complex stuff. They're stuff that we know other local authorities are already doing them. So see more people do them. Um, and it helps get money out to people now, but also takes us in the direction that we want to go to. We know that this isn't going to be done overnight, but if all the actions we do take us in that general direction, then that as of itself is a good thing, I think.
I guess that gives us the kind of the final wrap-up question then, which is how optimistic are you that this is going to happen, or at least a part of it's going to happen?
I think we're fairly optimistic that we're going to see some action. I think the fact that we've got the level of interest we have at a ministerial level, at official level, points to a desire to do something in this space. I guess some of the changes we might like to see around the eligibility criteria to make them more generous, something like that. Maybe a little less optimistic, about because there's obvious cost implications around that. But certainly seeing some action and a heading and a setting of the direction of the travel, I think that's definitely something we're hoping to see. And you don't count your chickens, but we're quietly confident that we will see something kind of come out in that space over the next few months.
Oh, I think that's really good, and presumably then we'll be seeing a lot more kind of consultation and an opportunity to feed in on that. Okay, can I thank you very much, Steffan, for that? It's been a kind of really interesting session. So diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am hynny. I'll throw a quick advert in for the next webinar we've got, which is the Dangos webinar on the 27th of July, where we'll be talking about self-employment issues. And with an apology for today's issues, I will make sure that the right link goes out from the Eventbrite registration page, and we'll double check that one before. So apologies again for people who had problems getting in. The session's recorded, so you'll be able to go back or point colleagues to the recording on the Dangos forum. I'll also throw in another couple of Dangos adverts that we are about to launch dates for new Dangos courses next month. So we'll be having sessions on older people, on children and young people, and on people in need of care. And we're also hoping towards the end of the month to launch a session on what's changed and changing as an updater for people about what's going on in the benefits and financial support world. So that's all the Dangos stuff. Full details will be on the Dangos forum at dangos.wrac.wales. And that's really about it from us today, I think. Once again, many thanks, Steffan. And we'll point you towards where all the recordings are. And if you could share those slides, we'll put those up on the forum for downloading as well. And many thanks to all of you for managing to struggle through and get access to the session today. So with that, I'll cease the recording and we can close the session.